I stood near the back where the air felt thinner, watching my family perform. My mother, Marian Archer, stood at the center like she had been born under a spotlight. The dress she wore was silk the color of old champagne. The neckline sharp, deliberate, commanding. Her hair, still golden at 62, was swept into the kind of updo that said control is effortless. Even the way she lifted her glass, a deliberate, practiced pause before she spoke, told me she was in her element. Her voice carried without a microphone. Welcome, dear friends, dear family. Every eye followed her, every smile bent toward her approval. I felt it again, that small trembling in my chest that came whenever I realized how easily she owned a room. I pressed my thumb against the condensation of my glass, grounding myself. Beside her, Lucas, my brother, looked every inch the heir apparent. His tuxedo fit like a second skin, and his grin seemed made for photographs. Veronica, his bride, glittered under the lights. Together, they looked like the faces of an advertisement for Legacy. I remember thinking how perfectly they all fit the frame, my mother, my brother, his wife, and how easily I disappeared behind it. I didn't want to be bitter, but bitterness had a way of finding me. When Marian placed a manicured hand on Lucas's shoulder and said, "Tonight we celebrate not only their union but the future of the Archer legacy," I already knew what was coming. The crowd clapped. Glasses lifted. I nodded along, pretending my stomach hadn't begun to twist. Then she turned her head toward me with that smile that never touched her eyes. "And Ethan," she said lightly, almost as if it were a kindness, "we're so glad you could come." Laughter rippled nearby, polite, pitying. I forced a smile, careful not to grip my glass too tightly. The polite nods around me felt rehearsed. The quiet one, the dependable one, I thought, the son who never quite belonged on stage. When she lifted her glass again, her next words struck like glass breaking inside me. "As part of this union, Lucas and Veronica will inherit the Archer Trust Fund at the end of this month." Applause, a few surprised gasps, then the band resumed its soft jazz. I stood still, my jaw tense, my throat burned. A waiter appeared at my side, white gloves, neutral expression, and handed me a cream envelope. My name embossed in gold. I opened it. Inside were legal documents. No greeting, no explanation, just numbers and signatures. My name was missing from the allocation list. My trust share, the one my father had once promised both his sons, was gone. The air around me seemed to contract. My hands went cold. I lifted my eyes to Marian. Her smile didn't falter, but her gaze flicked toward the envelope for a fraction of a second, and I saw it, that tiny spark of satisfaction. She wanted me to see this now. The applause rose again, glasses clinked. Marian's voice cut through the noise, smooth and final. "Please join me in welcoming the newlyweds and the stewards of the Archer legacy." The words hung like a sentence. The band played louder. I could barely breathe. I told myself to stay still, smile, don't give her the satisfaction, but inside everything cracked. They've erased me, I thought, right in front of everyone. The terrace outside the ballroom was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the faint sound of the band inside. Lanterns swung in the night breeze, painting everything in soft, white light. I leaned against the railing, the glass of water in my hand now warm, my reflection faint in the dark garden beyond. From inside came laughter, sharp, familiar, like the sound of polished glass striking marble. Veronica's laugh. I turned and saw them, Lucas and Veronica under the magnolia tree, her hand resting possessively on his chest. Their silhouettes blurred against the glow from inside. "Ethan," she called out when she noticed me, "enjoying the party?" Her tone was friendly enough, but something in her smile didn't match. It curved at the corners, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Yes," I said softly, "congratulations." "Thank you," she brushed an invisible thread from Lucas's lapel. "You know, your mother's speech was beautiful. We're honored." Lucas gave a small nod. "It meant a lot that you came. I could hear the unspoken part, even though you weren't part of it." "Wouldn't miss it," I managed, though my throat felt dry. Veronica's perfume drifted toward me, gardenia, the same scent Marian wore. I wondered if that was deliberate. Everything in this family usually was. They excused themselves with polite smiles, leaving me alone with the night. I stared at my reflection again, at the man in the dark suit with his collar slightly askew, the man who no one noticed unless he served a purpose. Dependable Ethan. The thought tasted like iron. Inside, the music swelled again. I heard my mother's laughter, clear and commanding, cutting through the crowd. My chest tightened. I turned away from the windows and walked toward the garden's edge where the shadows deepened. Somewhere behind me, a server cleared glasses from the tables, and I caught the faint scent of spilled champagne. The sweetness turned bitter in the cool air. I tried to steady my breathing, but humiliation has its own pulse. It beats faster than your heart. That night followed me for weeks afterward. In my mind, I replayed every detail: Marion's hand on Lucas's shoulder, the applause, the envelope. What hurt most wasn't the money, it was the message. The public erasure. We've decided your part in this story is over. And still I said nothing. After midnight, the estate fell quiet. The laughter had thinned, replaced by the faint hum of cleaning staff. I wandered the hall toward the library, the one room in the house that had always felt like mine. The scent of leather and old paper still clung to the air. The portraits on the wall watched me, generations of archers, every one of them captured mid-victory, holding ledgers or blueprints, a family of builders and financiers who believed legacy was a birthright. I wondered if any of them had ever felt what I felt now: small, erased, disposable. On the desk, I found the ledger I had been asked to update weeks earlier. I opened it without purpose until my eyes caught a line that made my breath catch. Ethan Archer deferred, 0 share allocated by decision of board. No note, no reason, just finality. The air felt colder. I stared at the page until the words blurred. I didn't hear the door open until her voice spoke softly behind me. Ethan. I turned. Dr. Irene Kessler stood there, silver hair, calm face, eyes that always seemed to see through pretense. She had known our family for decades. She'd been my mother's friend first, but somehow she had become mine. You didn't see everything tonight, she said quietly. Come with me. Her tone was different, urgent, protective. I followed her down a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of polish and dust. She stopped by the old study, closed the door, and from her purse pulled a small flash drive. She placed it in my hand. Keep this safe, she said. It has copies of your father's original trust documents, the ones with your rightful allocation, and more recent ones, altered ones. I found the emails between Marion and Lucas. They forged your signature. My hand trembled as I looked at the tiny object. Irene, are you sure? I'm sure, her eyes softened. I've kept it for months, waiting for the right time. Why? Because I knew this moment would come, and because you deserve to know the truth. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. My heartbeat matched it. I held the flash drive tighter. If this is true. It is, she said, but what you do with it, that's up to you. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air in the room felt too heavy. My world had tilted. My entire life, the quiet acceptance, the obedience, the trust, suddenly looked like complicity in my own erasure. Irene touched my shoulder gently. Never mistake their blindness for your truth. Your moment will come. When she left, I stood alone in that dim study, surrounded by portraits of men who had fought for power. I was the only one who hadn't, until now. This is the divide, I thought, before and after. When people talk about family, they use words like home, belonging, safety. I never knew what any of those felt like in the Archer house. Our dining room was an altar to appearances: crystal chandelier, polished oak table, 12 matching chairs, each one perfectly aligned. Every dinner was a performance. My father sat at the head, my mother to his right, Lucas beside her. I was placed on the opposite end, near the window, always at the edge of the picture frame. I can still hear the click of silver cutlery and my father's voice booming. Lucas, tell us about your presentation today. He would listen intently, nodding, proud. My mother would smile, one hand on Lucas's wrist as if anchoring him to her pride. Then, almost as an afterthought, she'd glance at me. And you, Ethan, how's school? Fine, I'd say. That's nice, she'd reply, already turning her eyes back toward Lucas. It was always nice, never good, never impressive, just nice. The word dug in like a splinter that never healed. When I was 9, I brought home a math competition trophy. I placed it in the center of the table that night before dinner. My father barely looked at it. "Lucas won his tennis match today," he said instead. "First place." The family clapped for him. I stared at my trophy as my mother said, "You'll make someone proud someday, Ethan." Someday, not today, not ever then. That moment taught me something. Silence was safer than seeking recognition. So I stayed quiet, even when the ache inside me grew sharp. I became the family's invisible problem solver, the one they called when the pipes burst or the accounts didn't balance. Lucas would say, "Ethan, you're good with numbers. Can you take a look?" And I would, every time, because helping made me feel momentarily seen. But no one remembered, no one said thank you, not once. When my father died, Marion's control solidified. She stepped into his place seamlessly, as if she'd been waiting for him to leave the stage. She managed the estate, the business, the trust. Lucas became her mirror, confident, loud, a replica molded by approval. And I, the second son, the quiet one, drifted into the background. At my 30th birthday dinner, Marion raised her glass and said, "Here's to Ethan, steady and reliable, the one who keeps things running." Applause followed. I smiled because that's what I'd been trained to do. Inside, though, the words cut deep. Steady and reliable, they meant safe, unthreatening, forgettable. I remember thinking, I am a support beam in their house, but they never see the beam. They only admire the walls. That night, after everyone left, I stood in front of the mirror in my old room and whispered, "What am I doing here?" The reflection didn't answer. It just stared back, hollow-eyed, tired, quiet. After college, I joined the family business, Archer Development Group. I was a civil engineer by trade, and they needed someone to manage the technical oversight for new projects. Lucas handled the investors, the press, the glamour. I handled the spreadsheets, the structural plans, the things no one ever saw. Marion called it a perfect balance, but I knew what it meant. He was the heir, I was the utility. She had a way of dressing her control in compliments. "You're practical, Ethan," she'd say. "You don't need the spotlight like your brother." It sounded like praise, but it wasn't. It was instruction: stay where you belong. When I once proposed a cost-efficient model for a housing project, she looked up from her papers, her tone crisp. "Lucas handles the big picture vision. You focus on the numbers, that's your strength." She smiled afterward, but her eyes warned, "Don't challenge the order." So I learned to disappear behind the work. My hours stretched long into the night, fluorescent lights buzzing while Lucas attended charity galas and photo shoots. I'd see pictures later, his hand on Veronica's back, his smile perfect, the caption reading, "Archer Heir continues the family's legacy of excellence." Sometimes I'd open the company website late at night and stare at the About Us page. Lucas's bio glowed at the top. Mine didn't exist. When I asked Marion once if I could be added, she said, "You don't need that kind of attention." And the conversation ended there. The financial control followed naturally. The trust fund established by my father was designed to give both sons independence by 35, but Marion managed it personally. She decided when funds could be accessed, what investments were appropriate. If I made a purchase she didn't approve of, she'd call. "Was that wise?" she'd ask. I'd defend myself only to hear her sigh. "You know, Ethan, it's not about the money, it's about image. You don't want people thinking you're careless." It was never her control, it was my supposed irresponsibility. That's how she kept the leash invisible. When I bought my small condo in the city, she didn't congratulate me. She visited once, looked around, and said, "It's quaint." The word carried a sting. "Why not move back to the estate? You'd save money," she added, voice light, but the message wasn't. She wanted proximity. She wanted surveillance. I shook my head. "I like the quiet here." She smiled faintly. "Of course you do." After she left, I sat in the dark living room for hours. The walls felt close. I realized the truth. I wasn't living independently. I was still inside her orbit, no matter how far I moved. Veronica made it worse. She played her role perfectly, charming in public, condescending in private. At a family dinner once, she said, "Ethan, you're so dependable, you must be everyone's favorite safety net." Laughter followed, light and cruel. Lucas didn't defend me. I raised my glass and smiled. "Someone has to keep the lights on," I said, but my hands trembled under the table. That's how it always worked, small cuts, constant, almost invisible, and over time they bled you dry. It was Irene who first told me the truth I didn't want to face. We were in the company office late one night. Everyone else had gone home. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights like scattered stars. Irene sat at the edge of my desk, reading through blueprints I'd drawn up for a community center project. She looked up suddenly and said, "Ethan, you know they'll never see you, right?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they use your steadiness as an excuse to keep you still. You've become the gravity that keeps their world in place, but gravity doesn't get thanked." Her words landed heavy. I stared at my coffee cup. "I'm fine where I am." "Are you?" she asked softly. "Or are you waiting for permission to matter?" I didn't answer. She sighed, folded her hands. "Never mistake their blindness for your truth. Your moment will come." At the time, I thought it was a kind sentiment, something older people say when they see you struggling. But later, I realized it was a warning. She knew what they were doing. She saw the manipulation, the rewriting of legal documents, the quiet theft of identity happening right in front of me, and I, too obedient, too trusting, didn't see it. At every family gathering after that, her words echoed in my mind. When Marian praised Lucas for shouldering the future of the company, I heard Irene's voice, "They'll never see you." When Veronica complimented me for being so calm under pressure, I heard, "They use your steadiness to keep you still." It was like waking up from a long sleep and realizing you'd been dreaming someone else's life. I began to keep records, small things at first: emails, contracts, memos with missing initials. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I was tired of being invisible. The night Irene gave me that flash drive, I understood why she had been waiting. She had believed in my moment before I did. I put the flash drive into my laptop and stared at the screen until the room stopped spinning. The cursor blinked. The file names filled the folder like a row of small, deadly truths. Not many files, enough. Emails first, subject lines plain, dates recent, Marian, Lucas, phrases repeated, reallocate shares, finalize by month end, remove Ethan. My stomach dropped with every line I scrolled. Their language was clinical. Their tone was casual. The casual part hit hardest. They treated theft like a business decision. I printed everything. The printer hummed in the small condo like a second heart. Paper stacked on my kitchen table. I spread the sheets and read them aloud to the empty room. Saying the words made them louder. Forged signatures, backdated notary, private meeting notes. A memorandum with an attached PDF labeled final allocation. My name struck through, my name replaced by Lucas and Veronica. I had always kept physical ledgers at the estate. I knew the trust structure by memory. I knew dates of meetings. I knew which notary had handled the original documents. I called that notary from my phone. The voice on the other end was polite. She confirmed a notarized form. The date matched a day I was overseas on a work trip. She said the signature matched the file she had. I asked if she could send a copy. She agreed. My hands trembled as I downloaded the attachment. On the screen, two signatures sat side by side. One was mine, the one I had signed on my father's file years earlier. The other was the current record. The differences were fine, microscopic, which made them worse. The slant of a loop, the pressure at the end of a stroke, the way the last letter hooked. I blew on the page as if breath could erase a lie. I called Irene. I told her what I found. She did not gasp. She did not tell me to calm down. She listened and then said, "Good, keep going." Her voice never rose. That steady tone steadied me. I hired a handwriting analyst. I sat with him for hours, watching under a glass top as he compared letters, tracked pressure points, mapped rhythms like weather patterns. He pointed to differences. He called the findings significant. He said the odds that both signatures came from the same hand were negligible. Then I dug deeper. Bank statements, wire transfers to shell accounts, meeting minutes with redacted names, a private email from Marion to an outside counsel referencing sensitive family matters. Every document I found expanded the crime from a single act into a pattern. Night after night I worked, coffee cups multiplied, my eyes blurred, my friends called and I made excuses. The work took over everything. The more I uncovered, the more my old life fell away. Sleep became a thin, bright slice of time I gave my body because the brain refused to rest. The deeper work forced memories up. Small, ugly scenes I had filed away, a signature I'd been asked to verify in a hallway at the estate, a conversation where Marion said, "We have to protect the family name," and Lucas added, "Ethan won't notice." I read the emails that said exactly that. Seeing the words felt like watching someone point at a stage cue and laugh. I kept thinking why they would do this while I was out of town. The answer was simple: opportunity. They knew absence made for easy rewriting. Truth hit like a cold wave. Anger came next, then fear. The fear arrived steady, professional, a technician with tools. I cataloged each feeling. Anger burned my throat. Fear pulled my limbs tight. I felt exposed, like someone had stripped the house of its wallpaper and left the nails showing. If I acted, I risked losing more than a family name. I risked public humiliation. Marion's network wrapped across boards and charities. One accusation from a son could wreck a matriarch in society, but the matriarch could bury a son with a whisper. The power imbalance rang in the back of my head. I imagined the headlines: Archer scandal, Sun Tzu's mother, family feud. I saw my mother on the front page with a practiced face. I saw Lucas at her side, hands steady, Veronica poised, my own face smaller under the flash of cameras. Panic rose and I forced it down. Guilt arrived next. I had been silent for years. I had accepted small slights. I had let them replace praise with neutral words like steady and dependable. Did silence equal consent? Had I been part of the theft by omission? The question haunted me. I had stacks of emails to prove their actions. I also had years of my own inaction. I outlined outcomes on a whiteboard: best case, worst case, middle ground. The list read like a ledger of possible losses and victories. Best case meant exposure, legal victory, reclaiming funds. Worst case meant legal retaliation, reputational ruin, estrangement from extended family. Middle ground sat ugly, with settlements and private agreements. Every thought had a shape. I replayed the wedding night over and over. Marion's smile. The envelope handed to me with polite gloves. The hush that followed when she announced the allotment. The hush had felt like a verdict. I realized I had felt that verdict long before the legal papers reached my mailbox. My memory turned into evidence. Sleep evaporated. Meals became token acts of maintenance. I walked to the engineer's office each morning and performed tasks with a quiet, efficient focus. I checked blueprints, met contractors, negotiated permits. Those concrete tasks helped keep my mind from spiraling. When work was done, I returned to the stack of papers on my kitchen table. I also felt shame. Shame for being the son who hid his pain. Shame for letting Marion direct the family narrative for decades. Shame for believing small praises while she stole larger pieces. When shame felt thick, I called Irene and she said nothing about cowardice. She pointed out patterns. She reminded me of facts. Her calm voice acted like a map. Then a raw resolve crept in. I realized that anger without direction would only burn me. Purpose gave anger a shape. Evidence formed that purpose. I started to plan methodically. Public disclosure required proof. Legal action required counsel. I needed people who would not bend to Marion's social weight. I needed a lawyer who knew family trusts. Every plan raised new fears. Each fear became a box on the board. I filled the boxes with contingencies. I wrote down names of lawyers. I noted media contacts. I wrote steps for securing my own financial base. I listed things Marion could do in retaliation. I listed what I would accept. Late one night, amid the sheets of print and the hum of the refrigerator, I found myself rehearsing the moment of confrontation. Words lined up in my head like a speech. I practiced tone. I imagined Marion's face collapsing into something real. I imagined Lucas stumbling for a defense. I imagined Veronica's eyes hard. The rehearsals felt both petty and necessary. Doubt crept back. I thought of losing my job at the firm where I had worked quietly for years. I thought of friends who might distance themselves. I thought of legacy boards who might remove my name from small roles I'd held. The list grew and then shrank. I crossed off items I would not accept. Irene sat with me through one of those nights. She poured tea and did not ask what I would do. She only said, "You have taken the right first step by asking questions." She tapped the papers. "Evidence matters, control matters. If you choose action, act with precision." The decision did not come as drama. It came as a tilt, subtle and steady like a fulcrum shifting under weight. One night I sat at my table, light low, the analyst's report open beside the email threads. I read the analyst's summary again. Probability of forgery high, motive plausible, opportunity confirmed. The math lined up, the law lined up. I closed the laptop, my hands rested on the table, palms down. The room smelled of paper and coffee. Outside, a siren passed in the night and faded. The noise felt like a punctuation mark. I thought of my father's voice once saying, "A family holds itself together by honor." I thought of the portrait of him over the mantel, eyes painted serious. Marion had taken an honor and placed it like a coin on a shelf. The act of theft had turned a principle into an object. I opened my eyes, my path spread simple and hazardous. Reveal the documents, file a suit, face public scrutiny. I felt fear, I felt relief. They balanced on a knife edge I did not want to step away from. I called a lawyer recommended by Irene. The conversation was short. He listened to the facts and asked for the files. He asked me to meet in his office the next morning. Hanging up, I felt the shape of the future tighten. The decision was no longer theoretical. I had chosen action. The next day, I handed in my resignation at the family company. I did not make a scene. I did not tell Marion. I wrote my letter and left it on the secretary's desk. Walking out felt like shedding skin. The press of air outside the office felt sharp and new. When I locked the condo door that evening, I carried with me 2 sealed boxes. One held the printed evidence. The other held personal items I could not bear to leave in a house where someone had erased me. I left both in my car and drove to Irene's. She opened the door without surprise. I placed the boxes on her table and sat down. "Your moment," she said quietly and did not smile. She handed me a pen and a list of contacts. The legal work had begun. My chest tightened in a way that felt honest. I had moved from anger to planning to action. The line had been crossed. The quiet sun had chosen to speak. The morning after I resigned, I woke before sunrise. The city was still dark, the air heavy with that faint metallic smell after rain. My mind had been racing all night, too alive to rest. There was a quiet pulse of fear running beneath everything, but it carried a strange calm with it, like the air before a storm. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing a finger over the coffee mug's rim. The place was a mess, papers everywhere, binders open, pens scattered like fallen soldiers. I looked at them and thought, this is what truth looks like before it's spoken, chaotic, uncomfortable, raw. I checked the clock, 6:32 a.m. My meeting with the lawyer was at 8. I showered, dressed, tied my tie, and looked at myself in the mirror. For a long time, I didn't recognize the man staring back. There was something harder in my eyes, a tightness in my jaw, not anger anymore, focus. As I drove downtown, the city unfolded in pale light. The streets were slick, reflecting passing cars like veins of gold. I gripped the steering wheel and forced myself to breathe evenly. I thought of all the years I'd watched Marion move through the world with certainty, never doubting her control. I had always mistaken her composure for power, but sitting there, heart steady, heading toward what would inevitably tear open everything she built, I realized composure isn't power, it's performance, and I was done performing. The lawyer's office sat in an old brick building downtown, unassuming. Inside, everything smelled of paper and faint coffee, an honest smell. His name was Daniel Huxley, mid-40s, clean-shaven, sharp eyes, voice quiet but decisive. He gestured for me to sit. Irene filled me in on the general situation, he said. Let's go over the details together. I slid the flash drive across the table. Everything's on there, emails, notarized documents, ledger entries, my signature's been forged. He inserted the drive into his computer, scrolling through the files with methodical calm. He didn't speak for a while, only frowned occasionally, muttered something about statute of limitations, fiduciary breach, forgery. Finally, he leaned back. You've got a case, a strong one. The digital timestamps, the handwriting analysis, the backdated notary, these aren't small errors. This was deliberate. They've committed fraud, plain and simple. Hearing those words felt surreal. Fraud, deliberate, not paranoia, not misunderstanding, truth. He continued, we'll file an injunction to freeze the trust's transactions. Then we'll move to petition for full disclosure. It'll be messy. They'll try to settle privately, maybe discredit you. I nodded slowly. I'm ready. He studied me for a moment, his tone softening. You've been holding this in a long time, haven't you? My throat tightened. 34 years. He nodded. Then let's get it back. When I left his office, the city had fully woken. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the traffic move, the sky brightening into pale blue. I felt both empty and full, like something inside had broken and made space for air. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the estate instead. The gates opened after a pause. The same iron pattern I had memorized as a child, symmetrical, ornate, too heavy for the illusion of welcome. I parked near the fountain, the one my father had imported from Italy. Its water still trickled softly, steady and indifferent, like time. Marion's car was in the driveway, Lucas's too. I almost turned back, but something in me refused. I had walked away too many times before. When I entered, the smell of jasmine hit me. She always kept fresh arrangements in the foyer. I remembered helping her trim stems as a child, her voice soft then, before she learned how to turn affection into a weapon. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. I found her in the study, reviewing papers. Lucas sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. When they looked up, I felt the familiar weight of their gaze, the one that measured me, cataloged me, prepared responses before I spoke. Ethan, Marion said, smiling as if we were in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. To what do we owe this surprise? I looked at her, the same perfect hair, the same polished nails, no hint of guilt. That unnerved me more than anger would have. I came to tell you, I said quietly, I know what you did. Lucas straightened. What's that supposed to mean? The trust, I said, the signatures, the backdated transfers, the emails. Marion's expression didn't change. She set her pen down slowly. Ethan, she said, voice smooth as glass, you must have misunderstood something. I didn't. I met her eyes. You forged my signature while I was overseas. A small silence, then a smile that wasn't a smile. And what if I did? She asked softly. You've always had trouble managing responsibility. This was about protecting the legacy. The word legacy hit like a slap. No, I said, it was about control. You couldn't stand the idea of me owning anything you couldn't oversee. Lucas stood, stepping closer. Watch your tone, Ethan. I laughed once, short, sharp. My tone? You forged legal documents and you're worried about my tone. His jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure of this family. You never have. I understand perfectly, I said. You took what wasn't yours because you thought I'd stay quiet, because I always did. Marion rose slowly, crossing to me. The scent of jasmine and expensive perfume filled the air between us. You think this is about money, she said softly. It's not. It's about order, about what's best for the family. You're emotional, unstable. There it was, the gaslight, smooth and practiced. I'm not unstable, I said. I'm done being silent. Her eyes flickered just once and I saw the faintest shadow of realization. Then she smiled again, colder now. Then do what you think you must. I will, I said. I turned and left before she could answer. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt to breathe, but beneath that pain was something fierce and steady. I had spoken the truth aloud and the world hadn't collapsed, not yet. That evening I went back to Irene's. She made dinner, simple soup, fresh bread, the kind of meal that grounds you after too many sharp conversations. When we sat down, she studied my face. You want to see them? I nodded. She didn't deny it. I'm not surprised. I thought I'd feel better, I said, but I don't, not yet. You won't, she said gently, not until you finish what you started. I stared into the soup bowl, watching the surface ripple slightly from the heat. My reflection bent and wavered. It's strange, I said. All my life I thought being quiet made me safe. Turns out it just made me easy to erase. Her eyes softened. Now you're writing yourself back in. I sat there for a long time, letting her words settle. The sound of the rain against the windows grew steady. I thought of the years spent trying to earn approval that would never come, the endless dinners, the careful silences, the obedience. And I realized every act of compliance had built the very system that erased me. Irene's voice broke the silence. Do you know why they fear you now? I shook my head. Because you finally see them clearly. Power only works when it stays unseen. Something in me shifted then, small, definite, irreversible. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Then it's time they see me too. Her mouth curved into the faintest smile. Then let's begin. The day the summons went public, the air felt different. The city was gray and restless, a low wind pulling at street banners and scattering newsprint through the crosswalks. I woke before dawn, checked my phone, and saw the headline waiting for me on the screen. Archer Air Files fraud suit against family. 3 lines, that was all it took to turn 34 years of silence into noise. By the time I reached the office, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. Journalists, old colleagues, even people from college I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. I turned it face down on the desk and stared at the wall. My lawyer Daniel had warned me, once we file, you'll lose control of the story. They'll try to define you before you can define yourself. Expect statements, expect spin. He was right. By noon, Marian had issued her response to the press. I read it online, her words wrapped in a polite veneer of disappointment. We are saddened by Ethan's misunderstanding and wish him healing during this difficult time. Misunderstanding. It was such a precise word, not lie, not theft, not forgery, a misunderstanding. The word stripped everything of weight, reduced the entire betrayal to a family spat. My stomach turned. I walked to the window, hands gripping the sill. Outside, traffic moved in smooth, unbothered lines. I imagined her sitting at her vanity that morning, dictating that statement to her assistant with her usual composure. No tremor in her voice, no guilt, just control. That was when the first reporter showed up at my building, then another. By evening, 3 more. They lingered outside like ghosts with cameras waiting for a reaction. When I finally stepped out, flashes went off in rapid succession. Ethan, is it true you're suing your mother? Do you have proof of the forgery? Is this about inheritance or revenge? Their questions sliced through the air, each one sharpened with suggestion. I kept my eyes forward and walked to my car. The flashes followed me. Inside the car, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It wasn't fear this time, it was the shock of finally being seen after so long invisible. I had wanted visibility my entire life, and now that I had it, it burned. The days that followed were a blur of motion. Meetings with Daniel, calls from court clerks, requests for evidence. Every detail I had gathered, the ledgers, the emails, the handwriting analysis, was now part of the official record. I spent hours in the lawyer's conference room, surrounded by boxes of documents. Each piece of paper told a part of the story, but together they painted something larger, a portrait of quiet cruelty stretched across years. When I left those meetings, the world outside felt distant, unreal. The noise of the street, the hum of conversation, the laughter spilling from cafes, it all felt like another dimension. I existed somewhere in between, half in the past, half in the waiting room of justice. Irene called every evening. Sometimes she didn't ask about the case. She asked if I'd eaten, if I was sleeping. Her care carried a steadiness that cut through the chaos. One night she said, "They're circling you. They'll use guilt. They'll use memory. Be ready." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I know. But knowing and feeling are never the same thing. I lay awake that night, the city quiet outside my window, and thought of Marian's face, how calm she'd looked when I confronted her, how certain. It wasn't the face of someone panicked, it was the face of someone who believed the world would always take her side. I realized then that this wasn't just about legal proof, it was about rewriting a narrative that had defined me since childhood. She had cast me as the obedient son, the quiet one, the stabilizer, and now, by speaking, I was betraying the character she had created. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 34 years, I'd been punished for not speaking loudly enough. Now I was being punished for speaking at all. In the weeks before the court date, I learned the difference between sympathy and support. Many people called to express the first, few offered the second. Cousins sent polite texts, "We're thinking of you, Ethan." Business acquaintances avoided eye contact at networking events. The Archer name carried influence, and no one wanted to stand too close to its fracture. Only Irene remained constant. She accompanied me to meetings, reviewed notes, helped me prepare statements. Her presence steadied me, reminded me that truth wasn't a solo act, it was a quiet collaboration between courage and clarity. Once, as we were reviewing documents late into the night, she said, "You understand what this means, don't you?" I looked up from the papers. "That they'll hate me." She smiled faintly. "They already do. This means you've finally stopped hating yourself." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded and kept working. In those weeks, time moved strangely, long hours that dissolved into sudden flashes of panic. The waiting was the hardest part. The days between filing and hearing stretched endlessly, heavy with what-ifs. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if Marion found a way to silence it? What if I lost? Every possibility carried the weight of another erasure. Still, beneath the fear, something new was growing, something that felt like defiance. Each time I spoke with Daniel, each time I answered a reporter with measured words, each time I refused to apologize for existing, I could feel it solidify inside me. I was done being quiet. The night before the court date, I couldn't sleep. I walked the apartment in circles, the hum of the city seeping through the windows. Every object around me, the stack of files, the folded suit, the cup of cold coffee, felt charged with significance. I sat on the floor, back against the couch, and tried to remember the last time I felt peace. Maybe when I was a child, before legacy became a word that governed my life, before I learned that silence could be currency. At some point, I found myself at the window, looking out at the skyline. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, a constellation of strangers awake with their own battles. I wondered how many of them were also standing at a threshold between fear and freedom. I thought of Marion. I thought of the years she'd shaped me, molded me, taught me restraint as though it were a virtue. And then I thought of Irene's voice, "They only fear you when you see them clearly." I whispered into the glass, "I see you now." The reflection that stared back wasn't the quiet sun anymore. It was a man who had finally realized that truth doesn't wait for permission. When dawn came, I was ready. The courthouse stood on the corner of Main and Fifth, its stone facade heavy with history. As I approached, my reflection appeared in the glass doors, a small figure dwarfed by the weight of architecture. Reporters lined the steps, cameras clicked, voices called my name. I kept walking. The echo of my shoes against the marble floor sounded louder than I expected, each step marking the end of an era I'd been too afraid to leave. Daniel met me at the security checkpoint. "You all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, "Just ready." He smiled faintly. "That's all you need to be." As we walked into the courtroom, I caught sight of Marion sitting at the defense table. Impeccable as ever, navy dress, pearl earrings, spine straight. Lucas beside her, jaw tight. Veronica's hand on his arm. They looked like a portrait of composure. For a brief second, I felt that old pull, the instinct to shrink, to make myself smaller so she wouldn't notice me. But then I remembered Irene's words and I lifted my head. This time I met her eyes first. And I didn't look away. The courtroom smelled of paper and old polish. Light fell in strips from the high windows. People sat in rows, faces thin under the strain of waiting. Cameras lined the back like small black birds. I felt the weight of every eye. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed flat on my knees. Daniel rose first. His voice was crisp. He laid out the case in plain lines. He spoke of emails, timestamps, a forged hand. He spoke of motive and opportunity. He spoke of the ledger where my name had been erased and replaced. Each sentence landed like another brick in a wall. I watched the judge listen. He never blinked. Across from me, Marion sat with that composed posture she wore in photographs, her spine straight, her hands folded, her face smooth and practiced. Lucas at her side, a mirror of calm. Veronica's fingers tapped a slow rhythm against her knee. Theirs felt like armor. Mine felt like a skin that had been stretched thin and then tightened. When Daniel finished, he turned and met my eyes. He smiled once, a small, steady grin, the kind of smile that means someone believes in you. It steadied something inside me I had not known needed steadiness. Then the defense rose. Their opening was all polish and fear. They framed my claim as a misunderstanding. The words sounded small in the big room. Misunderstanding, a family dispute, a moment gone wrong. Their lawyer used soft tones and broad gestures. He spoke of reputation, of preservation, of preventing scandal. He used words meant to shrink the damage. I felt anger like heat under my skin. The word misunderstanding tried to flatten a clear pattern into fog. I listened to him spin phrases and I heard through him the pattern of protection for the powerful, the same pattern that kept me invisible for years. The first witness called was the notary. Her voice sounded smaller live than it had over the phone. She confirmed a notarized document with a date matching my absence. Then she explained procedures. She answered questions pointedly when asked about signature verification. The clerk placed 2 documents side by side on the table for us all to see. The projection lit the screen. My earlier signature sat beside the newer one. They looked similar at first glance. Up close, the differences cut like a knife. The loop of an E placed slightly higher, the tail of an N shortened, the pressure at the end of a stroke missing. Small things, crucial things. Whispers moved like wind through the gallery. I felt a strange dissociation. I watched myself watch the room. Parents in the second row shifted. A woman 2 seats over covered her mouth softly. A reporter typed notes without looking up. Daniel called the handwriting analyst next. He came in with a slow gait and a folder thick with measurements. He spoke like someone reading blueprints. He pointed to curves, to islands of ink where pressure had changed. He used numbers, probabilities. He spoke of habit and muscle memory. He concluded the signatures had different authors. Marion's face did not move at first. She sat like a statue carved in complacency. But small things betrayed her. Her fingers tightened on the edge of her seat. The lipstick on her lower lip gleamed a touch brighter under the lights. Someone in the gallery shifted and her eyes flicked toward them. The practiced calm showed hairline fractures. I felt a slow wash of something new. Relief edged my fear. Evidence had weight, truth had shape. The room accepted the shape. Murmurs rose, faces turned. The air near me felt electric. Then the defense lawyer tried to poke holes. He questioned the chain of custody. He raised procedural doubts. He dangled the idea of a clerical error. He suggested eagerness in the analyst's findings. His tone suggested common sense where there was malice. The judge listened, fingers folded, the gavel a dark promise between words. I watched Lucas wait for the turn to speak. When he stood, he did not look like the stuttering child of old memories. He looked like a man rehearsed. He spoke of stewardship. He spoke of family duty. He painted a picture where my removal from the ledger was a corrective, a measure taken to secure assets. His voice held the old condescension. He used the language they had always used on me, steady, reliable, unsuitable for the center of things. Hearing him felt like a fresh cut. I remembered nights at the dining table, the way my father's eyes would linger on Lucas, the casual dismissal of my achievements. I remembered Marion's soft words at birthdays. The memory rose with the present and I felt time folding, pain and momentum braided together. When my turn came, Daniel signaled and I rose. My knees did not shake. My voice did at first, then steadying came. I read aloud passages from emails where Lucas and Marion had discussed reallocating shares. The emails were clinical. They used phrases about timing, about minimizing fallout. They used the phrase "remove Ethan." I tasted blood in my mouth. Speaking aloud gave the words a kind of brutality I had not allowed them in private. I saw faces. Old family friends had lines drawn in their mouths where favor had once lived. Reporters leaned forward. Marian watched me without blinking. For a moment she looked smaller, not broken, not yet smaller. When I finished reading, silence took the room like a curtain. The judge tapped his gavel gently and asked a question about intent. Daniel answered with calm facts. The defense tried to pivot to my motives. They suggested resentment, personal vendetta, a cheap tactic meant to turn the spotlight from the accused to the accuser. I felt anger flare, but I caught it before it leapt into spectacle. Showmanship would have made this about me. I had no desire for spectacle. I wanted truth. I wanted accountability. During a recess, I stood near the tall windows and watched cars stream by, their reflections moving across the glass in odd angles. Irene pressed a hand against my shoulder. Her presence felt like shore after too long at sea. "You did well," she said softly. Her voice did not carry news, only presence. That small fact steadied me more than praise. Back inside, the defense brought witnesses who praised Marian's philanthropy. They spoke of her contributions to hospitals, of scholarships bearing the Archer name. They spoke in golden phrases meant to sway. Their testimony created a smear of benevolence. They wanted the judge to see a woman whose life had value beyond finance. I did not argue with those facts. Marian had given money. The donations did not undo the forgery. As testimony unfolded, I felt another process inside me. Shame loosened. It came like a slow thaw rather than a sudden snap. Each page of evidence removed a layer of guilt I had carried for years. I had apologized silently for inconveniencing the family. I had accepted small praises in place of true recognition. The evidence said I had not been naive. I had been wronged. When witnesses for the defense faltered under cross-examination, the facade thinned. Small contradictions surfaced. A board member misremembered a meeting. An assistant could not confirm a phrase supposedly said in private. Little holes appeared. Marian's polished veneer took in light through those holes. The image of invulnerability blurred. At one point, Lucas's voice wavered when Daniel played a recording. The clip contained a fragment of a phone call where Lucas mentioned finalizing documents during my trip. The sound of his own voice, ordinary and unguarded, seemed to shock him. He sat with his head bowed for a breath that felt longer than any other in the room. I felt my chest loosen. Tears did not come. Exhaustion and relief moved through me like a cool wind. The arc of long years bent toward a point. The room had seen the proof of a betrayal. Public exposure had a strange effect. It moved people. It made the comfortable uncomfortable. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, cameras surged forward. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. I kept my head down and walked slowly out a side door. Voices followed. I did not answer the calls. The corridor felt narrow. My steps echoed. Outside, the afternoon air struck me like a hand. I breathed in and felt each inhalation count. People clustered on the steps. Some looked at me with pity. Some with curiosity, a few with cold dismissal. It hurt less now. I returned to Irene's house that evening. She poured tea with hands that did not tremble. We sat across from each other in the kitchen while rain tapped the windows slowly. The day had been heavy. It had also been honest. "You looked broken for a moment," she said finally. "Then you looked like someone else." I stared into my cup. "I wore their script for years," I said. "Tonight I read my own lines." She nodded. "Now you must hold to them." Her words settled over me. I felt a rawness still and a thin new thing beneath it. A shape, a future no longer written by other hands. The courtroom had not closed the book. The next chapter remained to be written, but for the first time I knew how it would start. The courthouse was silent when the judge returned to the bench. The final morning carried a heaviness that seemed to dull even the light. Reporters filled every available seat. Their pens hovered, waiting to capture whichever side would fall. I sat with my palms open against my knees, willing my breath to stay even. When the judge spoke, his tone was flat, procedural. The evidence presented shows deliberate falsification of legal documents and breach of fiduciary duty within the administration of the Archer Trust. The words moved in slow, weighted rhythm. Each one felt like a small release. Marion didn't move. Lucas stared at the table, lips pressed together. Veronica's fingers tightened on his wrist, an unconscious grasp of someone watching a life contract in on itself. The judge continued, "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff Ethan Archer." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it escaped me in a slow, shaky exhale. For a moment, I couldn't move. The words felt unreal, too large to fit in the space of my chest. Around me, whispers broke out. A reporter dropped her pen. Cameras clicked in quiet bursts. Daniel's hand landed on my shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. "You did it," he said softly. Across the room, Marion's composure cracked for the first time. Her mouth tightened, but her eyes, those calculating, unflinching eyes, flickered with something I'd never seen in her before. Not regret, not guilt, fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes the narrative they built no longer belongs to them. Lucas avoided my gaze. His face had gone pale, the easy confidence drained away. For a second I thought he might speak, some apology, some deflection, but he didn't. He only stood when the judge dismissed the court and followed his mother out without a word. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hall. I stayed seated long after the courtroom emptied. The quiet filled every corner, a new kind of silence, no longer suffocating but full of space. For the first time, I felt the air move freely through me. In the days that followed, the Archer name flooded every news outlet. The story spread faster than I could track it. Articles dissecting the scandal, talk shows debating legacy and greed, commentators trying to define my motives. Some called me brave, others called me ungrateful. I learned not to read the comments. But beneath the noise, something shifted in the air. People started reaching out quietly, privately. Former employees, distant relatives, even strangers. Their messages shared a theme: I know what it's like to be erased. I answered as many as I could. Each one felt like a reminder that invisibility isn't solitude, it's silence enforced by fear. And once someone breaks it, others begin to breathe again. Marion withdrew from public life. The foundations she ran began to dissolve one by one. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped coming. I saw photos of her once in a newspaper, thinner, quieter, still defiant in posture but smaller somehow. Lucas left the company. Rumor said he'd moved out of state with Veronica, though I never confirmed it. Their silence was its own confession. The trust was reinstated under my name, but money was never the victory I sought. It was proof that I hadn't imagined the theft, proof that the quiet child they raised to be invisible had built enough strength to be undeniable. I used part of the settlement to start a foundation in Irene's name, the Kessler Initiative, for children growing up in households where they were made to feel unseen. We built scholarships, mentorship programs, community centers. I visited one of them during construction. The smell of fresh wood and paint filled the air, and for a fleeting moment I thought of my father's old work sites. Only this time the blueprints were mine. Months later, I visited Irene at her home. She was sitting in her usual chair by the window, her cat curled in her lap. The afternoon light fell across the room in soft gold. "You look tired," she said. I smiled faintly, the good kind of tired. She poured tea, the sound of it delicate in the quiet. "You've carried this for a long time. How does it feel to finally set it down?" I looked out the window at her garden, the lavender swaying gently in the wind. "Lighter," I said, "but different, like I'm still learning how to live without the weight." "That's what freedom is," she said, "not the absence of weight, the ability to choose which burdens you keep." I thought about that for a long moment. The burden I chose was truth. It would always be heavy, but it was mine. When I stood to leave, Irene said softly, "You took your moment." I turned back to her. It wasn't just about me. She nodded. "It never is." Outside, the evening air smelled faintly of rain. The world felt bigger than it had in years. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and looked up at the sky, gray, vast, open. For years, I'd believed my family's legacy was something to inherit. I understand now it's something to define. My legacy wasn't built from what they left me, it was built from what they tried to take away. And as I drove home, windows down, wind in my face, I realized that vindication doesn't sound like applause or judgment. It sounds like silence finally belonging to you. If you've ever been dismissed, silenced, or told to stay in your place, remember this: being underestimated isn't your curse, it's your camouflage. The quiet ones see everything. And when the time comes, when your moment finally arrives, step forward. You won't need to raise your voice. You'll already have their attention. That was the end of Ethan.